June 17th, 2021, and this is the Ethics and Campaign Review Board. Can I have the roll call, please?
Yes, Chair Miller,
Yes, here.
Member Amer, Judith Amer,
You're muted, Judy, if you are talking.
Member Biederman,
Paul is excused and will join us if he can.
thank you. Member Kovnat,
Here.
Member Lujan,
Here.
Member Martinez.
Here.
Mr. Chair, a quorum is present.
Great. Judy, we can see you're here, but we couldn't hear you because you're muted. I don't know if you're connected to hear us.
Naturally, somebody called me, right? So I had to mute myself, but yeah, I'm here and my cooler is a little bit loud. So I think I will mute myself except when I want to talk so it won't disturb everybody.
Great. Well, that works for us. Let's see. We've done the roll call. Do we have an agenda? Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Move to approve the agenda.
So moved by Ruth, and I think I saw a second from Mr. Han. I suppose we do a roll call vote for everything, even motions like this. So let's go ahead and take that vote.
Okay, Member Amer,
Aye.
Member Kovnat,
Yes.
Member Lujan,
Yes.
Member Martinez.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Thank you. We've been given the minutes from our last meeting of May 6th, 2021. We've all had a chance to review the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
Oh,
Okay, moved by Ms. Lujan, seconded by Ms. Martinez. A roll call vote for that approval of the minutes, please.
Yes, Member Amer,
Yes.
Member Kovnat,
Yes.
Member Lujan,
Yes.
Member Martinez.
yes.
The motion has been approved.
Great, thank you. So let's jump right in. We have a few things to cover today. Let me see. I think I got my agendas mixed up. But the first thing on the agenda, I believe, is legislation regarding the ECRB's responsibility to appoint members of the Independent Salary Commission. Is that right? Okay,
Yes,
I'll see
Miller.
if I can.
That is correct.
See if I can find the right agenda here. So that issue we learned about at the last meeting and discussed a very little bit, and I understand it has now passed the governing body, and we've, I think, seen the legislation that although I was a little bit confused about the legislation we got in our packet because I wasn't sure I saw where exactly the ECRB's role was set out. But I think the point of this agenda item is to hear about that ordinance and hear about the ECRB's role and figure out what our next steps are. And I guess, Christine, are you here to tell us a little bit more about that or guide us through that process?
I believe our attorney, Marcos Martinez, is on for that item.
Oh,
Marcos,
great. Thank you, Marcos.
Yep, there's Marcos.
Thank you, members of the ECRB, Mr. Chair. You know, I was going through the memo and the legislation as well, and I had a similar sort of question. I didn't move this item through the committee process with the city. The city attorney, Erin McSherry, did, but I did review her memo and the legislation. I read those as they were part of the packet. You know, I would hesitate to we go beyond the memo without any more, well, off the top of my head, I suppose. And the purpose of this legislation, I guess I do want to talk to the city attorney about how this interacts with the ECRB's duties, because I didn't exactly see that intersection here. Really, this looks like it was a legislative cleanup to allow a commission to, take effect so that it wouldn't run in conflict with a current mayor. And this is a problem that sort of resulted as the city opted into the Local Election Act. It moved the dates and the times of our elections and when people take office. And that was the thrust of what I saw this legislation doing. But I guess I'll leave it at that and stand for potentially questions, though I don't know how much more I can illuminate.
Sure. Okay. So maybe we got the wrong legislation in our packet. Is that because although this is very recent, this is from March and April. But my understanding was that the appointment of the commission would be done by the ECRB. And so I see the other cleanup that's covered in the memo and in the legislation we were provided. And I suppose that the commission membership is the same, and the process for obtaining applicants for the commission is the same, and that there's a public notice or a public request for applications, something like that. But I guess at that point, that's where I believe the ECRB will step in and evaluate those applications. But I was just looking for some guidance to the board about how that works or what we should expect.
I'm not sure that I got this material in a packet. And so if someone would just start from the beginning
Okay.
and describe how the process is envisioned and where the ECRB comes in, I would really appreciate that.
Ruth, I had the same issue, and then I realized that if you look at your agenda, it has a blue link to santafe.primegov.com public portal. If you click on that, that will get you to the documents. And I was able to do it that way. And so I think you can probably get to the documents. And part of what's on there is an ordinance 2021-9, and then there is a fiscal impact report, and then there is a memorandum, and those are the three items that you can see. Does anybody have anything else?
Not for this item. Ruth, are you at a computer where you can receive an email and open some things up? I can probably,
yes, if you would do that, I'll stay on the computer and I'll receive them on my phone, and I'll be able to read them on my phone. Thank you.
I'll shoot an email with the materials attached to you that might be easier than going through the Prime Gov.
Great, thank you.
But
Thank you very much. I appreciate
but
it.
Judy's right. For if we do have another remote meeting, the way the material is being distributed is through a link in the agenda that takes you to PDFs of the material. So
okay. Sorry for
that's okay.
not seeing.
So one of the I guess the issue here is that the material that was provided on the link is not, doesn't include what we understood to be amendments to the ordinance, providing that the ECRB is the appointing authority for the commission. So maybe we're in standby on this. Do you agree, Marcos, that we maybe all we need to do on this is be aware that that's coming to the board, and the city, when at the appropriate time, will reach out and let us know of the process for evaluating the applicants? Is that where we go from here?
That's my recommendation right now. If I learn of anything different, I would certainly contact this you or give notice to the clerk to perhaps try to convene another meeting if there were any kind of exigency. But that makes sense to me.
Okay. I think that's really all we need to do on that issue, unless anybody has any other questions. All right, I'm not seeing any questions, so let's go to item 6B on the agenda, which is an update on the legislative process following our recommendation at the last meeting to amend ordinances to adjust the threshold contribution and expenditure amounts. So I think this one is also for you. Is that right, Marcos? Will you let us know what has happened since our last meeting on this issue?
Yes, this will also be a brief update. We've basically taken the recommendation by this board. I've confirmed that 2 counselors want to be sponsors, and the intention is to introduce the legislation at the June 30th meeting. And so that's basically it. I think that the ECRB's recommendations were well taken, and there wasn't much controversy about them at all, as I met individually with some of the members of the governing body to answer questions about it. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone on this body has, though, regarding that process. Really, it's just the introduction of the legislation, and then if all goes well, the amendments would actually be adopted roughly 30 days to 45 days later.
Judy?
Yes, now, has there been like a fiscal impact analysis performed yet? And if
No,
so,
oh, go ahead.
and if so, like how much will it cost the city to implement this?
Well, I will consult with the city clerk as we put together the FIR, the fiscal impact report on these amendments, but I didn't see a lot of impact from this legislation, this proposed legislation. These are basically legislations, in my view, in my personal view, that allow a little bit more participation with a little bit less regulation. So in other words, these thresholds are higher than what were previously there. And so the need to do any kind of reporting will be less until you trigger these thresholds, either in terms of the independent expenditures, expenditure limits raised to $500, or the PAC amount, which is $5,000. So I see less of a fiscal impact, or positive fiscal impact, if it could even be measured.
So perhaps a decrease in administrative burden.
Marcos, I think you said the legislation had a sponsor. Did you say who the sponsor is?
Oh, no, but I'd be happy to. It's Councilor Romero Worth, and Councilor Garcia is also very interested in being a co-sponsor on this legislation.
Great. Well, I will, if you would let either of them know that if they have questions about the board process and getting here, we'd be happy to provide any information or explanation for where we came down on that legislation. So thanks for working with them to move this along. We appreciate it.
Thank you. I think they really appreciated attending the last meeting because that brought them up to speed. So I
Good.
appreciate it.
Good. Does anyone have questions for Marcos or the city or comments on this item? Okay, well, we'll stay tuned and let us know if you need anything. Let's move on to the next item, which is a discussion and possible action on whether pursuant to the ordinance passed by the city council, the ECRB should enact regulations or otherwise recommend legislation to permit the use of electronic signatures. So as we all know, this is an issue that we've been discussing for some time. From the very beginning, my impression has been that there was general consensus among the board in favor of permitting electronic signatures if it would facilitate candidates' ability to collect and gather these qualifying and seed money contributions. The city and the city clerk's office over time, I think, have become receptive to it and are also positive about the benefit that this could provide, and less concerned about administrative burden and other expenses that would go along with it. All of this with under the condition that the electronic signatures could be used in a secure and trackable kind of way. And it seems like a lot of those questions are felt by the city to be manageable now. So I think there are really two main issues. And first, the primary issue is, does the board want to take steps to allow electronic signatures? And second, if yes, then how? And should the board do so by promulgating a rule through the board or going through our more typical process of recommending legislation to the city council and providing them our idea of what that legislation would look like? And my sense on that second question is that from past discussion, it seemed like the board was more inclined to make a recommendation to the governing body, but neither of those decisions have been made. What we have done based on the past discussion and that impression was Marcos has worked with the city legislative team and really rather quickly and helpfully had put together some draft legislation for our consideration. So if we do want to recommend or allow electronic signatures, and if we wanted to make that recommendation to the governing body, we can take action on that item today, those issues today. So I think with that, I'll just open it up for discussion, and maybe Christina, since you're the leader of this subgroup, do you have anything to add or to flesh out on that discussion?
Not much to add to what you said, Justin, but Marcos and I went over the language, and obviously if we decide to recommend adoption of the amendments to the ordinance, once it's adopted, if adopted, there will be, logistics to work out. And I think that's probably something that the city clerk's office will need to figure out. But I think that we can accomplish what we want to do, which is allowing electronic signatures by a very simple amendment of the ordinance.
Great. Ruth, have you been able to see the materials that I sent to you that have that draft ordinance in there? Have you been able to access that?
Well, I would if I. No, it's not opening, Justin.
Okay.
I got your,
Did you get my
I
email?
got this nice email that has in tiny print. The
Is there too much there?
update.
The
It's not,
attachment,
I can't open it. It won't, it just won't open.
okay.
Sorry.
Okay, I think this, like Christina said, the legislation is very simple. So Marcos or Christina, would you like to explain what the draft legislation does? I think most of us at least can see it, but it might help to kind of walk through how we would make this change if we were to go this route.
Yeah,
I'm taking notes in fashion.
I can start. Are you, is everyone able to see the sort of redlined version of the legislation? I was actually having a little bit of trouble myself pulling it off of PrimeGov. But I have it separately, so I just wanted to make sure everyone else had it before I talked about it, or I
Is
could
it
share
on
my
the-
screen.
I
Can
got
you
it.
share it on the screen?
Yeah, that might be useful. Did you want me to share my screen, or were you sharing?
Oh
your
yeah,
screen?
can you?
Can the host give me this permission?
You should have it, Marcos. Let me know if it's not activated.
Let's see here. I also noticed that 3 people are in the waiting room, and I wonder if we should let them in as well now that I've been made a co-host.
Yes.
Okay, let me share my screen. I hope this matches what everyone else has here. Might look a little different because this is my own Word version of it, and I suspect you might have a PDF of it. Basically, there are 2 provisions in the city code, 9-3-6, that made reference to the Ethics and Campaign Review Board's ability to, by regulation, permit the use of electronic signatures on forms for seed money and qualifying contributions. And the language is very similar in both sections, but I'll scroll up and down so that everyone can see it. Or maybe I can adjust the size of my screen. And so all we did was delete this sort of permissive sentence that allows the ECRB to do that, and made it mandatory that the city clerk shall accept these types of signatures, so long as that the signatures comply with an act, the Uniform Electronic Transaction Act, which has several provisions which talk about, authentication of the signature and kind of preservation of records. And so I thought that the act was relatively straightforward, and it's possible to read the act such that it already would have required the city to accept these types of signatures. And so rather than just have it be a permissive action by this body, I thought, and I hope I'm not speaking for Christina Martinez, that she agreed that it would just be a little bit simpler at this point in time if the ordinance is just clear, and that the ordinance just direct the clerk to accept these types of signatures. And so there's not much more than that, but I'd be happy to try to address anyone's question.
Thank you, Marcos. Any questions?
Seems completely straightforward to me.
Yeah, I think this is the right way to address it in legislation. Marcos, my question is how, and this is probably also for Christine, is is this the administrative requirements for implementing this? Is the clerk's office will be able to do that in short order, or what does that process look like if the legislation were to pass?
I think that's a good question and an important question. As I read the Uniform Electronic Transaction Act, it sort of puts a little bit of the onus of obtaining one of these electronic signatures on the person attempting to do it. So in this case, it would be a candidate who's collecting seed money contributions and qualifying contributions. I think there'd be a little bit of education in knowing that the type of electronic signature that they're delivering or the record of it sort of complies with the act. But I think after a little bit of sort of a startup period of time, and this is just me speaking as someone who's not had to implement it, but just reviewing the act itself, I think it can be done relatively straightforward. I've spoken a little bit, but perhaps not enough to the clerk, but I know that she's done some research on some of the applications that are out there, mobile applications, and they seem to do some of this authentication and preservation of record automatically built into some of the apps that are out there already being used in other jurisdictions to collect money.
Good.
Excuse
Chair
me, do we
Miller,
know whether the city clerk is comfortable with this? I mean,
yes, Chair
Okay.
Miller and Member Kovnat, I am comfortable with this. I absolutely support using technology in as many ways as possible. And I think that especially in the time of COVID and what we've lived through recently, we've all proven that electronic signatures as even just part of a daily life are very beneficial. So I am absolutely in support of using electronic signatures. I think as Attorney Martinez mentioned, there's already many programs in other jurisdictions that have utilized technology on this, and I have been in communication with certain apps and programs, but we could implement fairly quickly.
good. Thank
Good. Yeah,
you.
that's good for us to hear, because one thing the board does not want to do is impose a burden on the clerk's office that could not be met. And so that's comforting to hear. Ms. Lujan, I saw you with your hand up.
Yes, so Chair, I have a question in regards to this. I know that the city of Albuquerque is accepting the electronic signatures. I think that was mentioned and maybe last meeting, but so are we looking to use that same platform that they have? Because I asked to know, that platform was accepted by the Secretary of State. Have you looked into that?
What we've looked at so far, member lines, is that we would there's certain programs that the candidates themselves would use to collect signatures, and then we've also looked at just creating a centralized program like the City of Albuquerque and platform that we would implement and provide. So I think it's both. But we are looking to work with the City of Albuquerque as far as some of their implementations. I've also tentatively scheduled meetings with some of the platforms. ActBlue is one of them that I know uses signatures and will upload our forms and kind of mimic and do some authenticity for them as well.
Okay, so you're just talking, Mr. Chair, Madam Clerk, you're talking to the City of Albuquerque and understanding what their platform, what they're using? Are you talking with the Secretary of State about it as well? Or do we would like to get her approval. Are you looking to have a meeting or talks with her office or with her?
Yes, I have actually sent communication to the Secretary of State's office about this legislation and or potential kind of meetings and setting time up to discuss this. So yes, I have been in communication with her office about this.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Clerk. I appreciate you letting us know that. And I think that, if it's working there, and, I don't know the full understanding or what program, actually, a platform they're using, but just get back to us and let us know, how those meetings go. And so we can just have some more of that information. But if it's working for them already and they already have it implemented and it's functioning well, and that's kind of what I've asked and I understand that is happening, it'd be nice for us to just know that, have something already, know that something's already in place and, not really reinvent the wheel here. So thank you.
Thank you, Miss Amer.
Yes, I would agree with what Ms. Lujan just stated in that the change to the ordinance looks acceptable, and then it begs the question, what complies with the Uniform Electronic Transaction Act, and if a municipality has already gone down that road, it would be extremely helpful to see how they've done it. And in addition, looking at the act, it talks about the retention of records, and so I'm assuming right now the city clerk retains hard copies of regular signatures, right? So you would need to retain electronic versions of electronic signatures, and you'd also need to retain electronic payments, however they're made. So for all those reasons, it seems like, but I'm not an IT expert, but it seems like if it were a city system, then the city would be able to retain have all those records and retain all those records because the city would be in control of the system, and you wouldn't have to worry about tracking down all the signatures so you'd be able to retain them, and tracking down all the electronic payments to retain them. That's my only question. And I also am wondering, there probably will be a fiscal impact, I assume, and I guess somebody probably at the city is preparing that. Those are my comments.
Chair Miller and Member Almer, that I think there's probably two simple ways to explain this, and I hope this is beneficial for everyone. The first would be that candidates themselves could utilize apps and websites and technology for the collection of signatures. The model that the city of Albuquerque has, which we've been in coordination with them closely for several of their technology, several of the technology pieces that they've put in place. They actually, as you mentioned, Member Almer, they host the website, they collect everything, they monitor everything. That one obviously does have a much larger fiscal impact to the city of Santa Fe. That also would require the city to do an RFP for the services, or get a contract in place to have that. So that does have a longer timeline. It also is a bit more financially intensive, and is something that we're looking at doing. There's a variety of things that that I've looked at with our assistant city clerk and the city of Albuquerque for everything from electronic signatures to online forms and reporting for public campaign financing. So I think that's one set. And then as we mentioned, there's the other set in which candidates would use websites or apps that are already set up to to do this on an individual basis, that one could be implemented being a bit faster and with no fiscal impact or very minimal fiscal impact to the city. I hope that was helpful.
It was helpful. Thank you for that. I suppose if we recommend this legislation, and it will take some time to work its way through the governing body and would give you a certain amount of lead time. And it sounds to me like you're confident that you would be ready. Clerk's office will be ready in the event that this did pass. But I guess you would, I guess I would encourage you, if you do run into roadblocks or find problems, then in this interim period that you let us know, and we can offer the board's, thoughts or help on that. But that all sounds reasonable. I'm glad you're thinking about it, and it sounds like taking the steps you need to be ready. Does the board have any other questions or comment?
Chair Miller, if I could just have one more comment. I think one of the items to note on this is that, to be completely transparent, I don't know, given the amount of time it takes for legislation to work through our current process and the deadlines for application signature, I don't know that an expectation for this election is reasonable or realistic. So I do want to be transparent in that. I'm not really, it's about a several week process as legislation goes through our committee process and then to the governing body. And then we, as you mentioned, I would like to have some type of training and additional support documentation in place, because the only way it could actually be done for this election is, I think, if we were to allow individual candidates to utilize their own technology and websites. And as I've mentioned, I've been in contact with the Secretary of State's office. I also work closely with the county clerk and would want to discuss that with her as well. So I do, just as a complete disclaimer, want to put out there that it would be extremely ambitious for this election, although that makes me very sad, especially given coming out of COVID. I think it would have been a really great tool to have in place, but I would like to continue to work on this, because I feel like it's a piece of technology that we should absolutely use. And I think it's very beneficial to candidates and very beneficial to just individuals who would like to participate in the election process in general. So I hope those comments are appropriate, but I did want to express that.
Good, thank you. It makes me wonder if we need an effective date or something on this legislation. Is that, and maybe now is not the time to do it. Maybe the board would vote on whether to recommend the legislation, the amendments, and an effective date could be put on at the appropriate time with the most knowledge about the time frame for effective implementation. That's part comment, part question. Maybe Christine or Marcos, if you have a sense, do you think we should consider an effective date now, or is that something that could be added at the right time later?
I think, I think that the governing body would be curious or willing to know what the ECRB's opinion is on an effective date. If you have a recommendation, they always want to take that into consideration seriously. I would say that this is a case in which the legislation, writing the amendment, is much easier a little bit than implementing it, as I think the city clerk has ably explained it. And so this is also a case in which the FIR is a little bit more complicated, because it would depend on what approach the the city would want to take sort of a centralized system versus a distributed system in which the candidates are using apps, but we still have sort of the record retention issue to work through. So I think either saying making it effective for the next election, or giving some period of time in which staff is able to expeditiously implement it, because if it does involve an RFP, again, all of these public processes have their own timelines, and I hate to have a specific date in there, unless it's the 2023 election, which I'm sure we could meet.
Chair Miller, if it's appropriate, I would like to just follow that up and say it is true. If we were to look at a centralized system, I think it's a little different. I'm more comfortable with the individual apps as they all are. We could essentially note what app they would like to use, and then we would be able to they would still need to turn in the items essentially. They don't just get to keep the signatures in their app. So there's downloadable forms and reports that they would still submit. But I'm also very comfortable and have spoken with some of the counselors, I think in advance when I originally was brought on, and some of the desires to implement technology into our department were discussed, knowing that I would do everything I could for this election, but really these are things that should be implemented a bit with a little bit of lead time in that. So part of it is also my desire to be responsible with some of this. But I think, again, if there's, I'm open to discussion as to whether anyone has a preference or experience for which direction, because it would, we, to be completely honest, I think had focused on the candidates using apps or websites. And it wasn't really until I believe member Kovnat, or maybe it was Amber, discussed the city of Albuquerque, which I have looked into, but it is a bit different timeline for implementation. So the focus really to this point had been on allowing candidates to use a technology more of their choice rather than the implementation of a centralized system for the city.
Okay, Ms. Lujan, I saw your hand, and then Ms. Amer.
Yeah, just Mr. Chair and Madam Clerk, just everything that you said, I think is completely relative and is substantial to us making a decision to wait and maybe set a date for the next election cycle, because we are in an active election cycle right now. And I feel that you getting the base and having these discussions and these meetings and everything still in the midst right now that we are in COVID. So that's still happening too. And I know that offices are not in full functionality right now. So I would support you and what you're asking us to do here with that, and to to wait till the next election cycle, so that you have the time and the preparations and everything in place for you to get this done well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Amer.
Yes, just to Christine's point, I'm just curious as to how, if it were the candidates who were using their own computers to gather the signatures, how does the city then be able to retain these records? Because of the retention portion of the app. I think that's something that needs to be figured out, because I know that you retain the records now in hard form, so you're going to have to do the same thing electronically. So just mechanically, I don't know how it works out.
I'm happy to fill that, Chair Miller and Member Amber, if you would like. You still download the files. We would still have the ability to have hard copy files. They would still be turned in the same format. And many of the organizations, you send them a form and they actually build the template that mimics the ones that we have, for example, like our our $5 seed $5 contribution forms, excuse me, our seed money contribution forms. So they'll actually build out an online template that mimics it, but then we're able to download that file. We would still need that as part of the proof, and then we would retain those copies. So I hope if that's, I'm happy to explain more, but I think, that's.
No, that's helpful. Thank you.
Good. So if it sounds to me like there may be some interest in setting an effective date down the road with enough lead time for the clerk's office to comfortably work out all the details. Is that an amendment? Marcos, I hate to put you on the spot, but can we craft that kind of amendment to the legislation that has been presented to us in order to bring it to a vote? Do we just say the draft ordinance with an effective date of, I don't know what it would be, January 1, 2022, or with some other, is that enough lead time, or do we need to tie it to the next election? Or I'm just curious your thoughts on if we can make that kind of change in a way that the board can still take a vote on it today.
Well, to the procedural question of whether you can make that change to this draft, this bill draft is yes. I think you can by motion move. One person can move to approve these amendments with an effective date of January 1, 2022. If that's something, it looks to me like the city clerk was comfortable with that date. So that's how you would procedurally do it, I think.
Okay. On that point, Christine, is that if the effective date was January 1, 2022, is that in your estimation enough lead time?
Absolutely, Chair Miller. This is something that was probably the first meeting I ever had as city clerk, was to explore these types of technologies. And I think we would be able to do that. And to be completely honest, I would love to have this in place. I think it's something that we started working on, but as we all know, between schedules and timing, it just has continued to get closer and closer to the upcoming election date. And so I don't want to add confusion or anything. And I think that date is fine. It would also probably allow us the opportunity to do an RFP and make and explore a model similar to that of Albuquerque's, which I think would probably be really great also.
Okay. Ms. Lujan, I think I saw you had a comment or question.
Yeah. Comment, just procedurally, I think we'd make the amendments and then vote on that amendment and then vote again to accept this piece of legislation as amended. I think, is that how I'm understanding this?
I think we can do it in one, right? If someone chooses to move that the board recommend this legislation, it would be the legislation as drafted with amended to include an effective date as of January 1, 2022. That's my understanding.
Okay. I just used to handling these separately, to accept an amendment to a piece of legislation first, and then that piece of legislation as amended by board or by separating it out that way. It's fine if it's successful and that's part of how we do things in our rules. And
yeah, well, we can go either way. We have the draft under discussion and no motion on the table yet. So if somebody prefers to move it in two pieces, we can deal with it that way. But I think we can also go with one vote. let's see, any board members have questions, comments, or is there any further discussion? Or if not, perhaps we can entertain a motion. Okay, I'm not seeing any other discussion. Ms. Lujan?
So, did you want to make the motion? Did you need a motion, Mr. Chair? Is that what you're asking me for right now?
If the board would like to vote, yeah, let's have a motion. It seems like we're ready.
Okay, I mean, I'll make the motion that we accept this piece of legislation with an amendment of effective date of January 1, 2023.
2022 or 2023?
2022, I'm sorry. I'm living in the future.
I know
I'm thinking
time.
fiscal year. Sorry.
I know time flies. Okay, so as I understand it, the motion is from Ms. Lujan to approve the draft legislation with an amendment providing for an effective date of January 1, 2022 to recommend to the governing body. Did I restate that right? Okay, thumbs up from Ms. Lujan. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Kovnat. Is there any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, I think we're ready for a roll call vote on the motion.
Okay, Member Aymer,
Yes,
Member Kovnat,
Yes.
Member Lujan,
Yes.
Member Martinez.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for that discussion. It's been a long process, and thank you, Christina, for driving it all this time. But I think we wound up in a good place, so thank you.
Thank you to Marcos for drafting.
Oh yeah, thank you too, Marcos. And thank you, Christine, for answering all our questions. Appreciate it.
Yes, I appreciate it. Both to Christina and Christine. Board member Martinez, I mean.
Good, thank you. Okay, moving on to item 7B, which was a discussion possible action regarding amendments to the election code to address procedures to resolve tie votes. This issue came up briefly at our last meeting, excuse me, and relates to a proposal to resolve the difference between the city ordinance that calls for resolution of tie votes by in the ranked choice voting process, calls for resolution of a tie vote by drawing lots. And there's a conflict between that city ordinance and the New Mexico Administrative Code, which calls for a resolution of a tie vote by a little bit more complicated process in resolving the tie in favor of the candidate who received the greatest number of combined first choice votes and transferred votes at the previous stage of tabulation. And goes on to say, if the first round tabulation results in a tie between candidates, the tie shall be resolved against the candidate who received the least number of combined second choice votes. So the concern was that if there is a tie vote in the city election, there would be some dispute about whether the city ordinance resolution process should be followed or the state, the process set out in the state administrative code. We talked about this. We do not have draft legislation to present to the board today. But but it's a fairly simple issue. I think we're probably in the position of, not necessarily taking a vote on this, just a quick discussion and seeing if the board wants to direct the city to prepare legislation to synchronize the city ordinance with the state code. I think that's where we are. We put a lot on the city kind of late with a quick meeting, quick following our last meeting, and so we just don't have legislation ready yet. But if we want to go this route, it's not complicated legislation, and it seems like it would be helpful. So with that, I'll just open it up for discussion, seeing if anybody has any comments or thoughts about it. Yes, Ms. Amer.
Yeah, I have a question. You said that it was a New Mexico administrative code that the city's ordinance conflicts with, or is it a statute?
It's in the administrative code and rules promulgated by the Secretary of State.
Okay, because I was trying to look at the packet and I don't, did you provide a copy of that rule?
No, we talked about it. I'll give you the citation though.
Okay,
It's 1.10.14.9F.
And just say it once again.
Okay,
Yeah.
1.10.14.9F.
okay. My only thought is, if Santa Fe is a home rule municipality, then why would it need to follow the state, Secretary of State administrative code?
Let's see, does somebody want to answer that, or?
No,
Marcos?
I can wade into this a little bit if you want, if it's helpful to you, Chair Miller.
Sure. Yes, please.
I think I certainly appreciate the question. I think what we would like to do is avoid any dispute at the time of a tie. And so while there might be a question of whether the city absolutely would have to do this, or whether the rules that are being authorized under the election code preempt the city's code in this instance, I think my recommendation would be not to have a conflict. And if the language is acceptable and intelligible, then I don't see it as being maybe worth a conflict with the state. So I think it's really just to make sure that anything that any candidate is looking at would say the same thing, regardless of whether the source is ranked choice voting. And right now, I think that the city of Santa Fe is still the only municipality that has this implemented. And so this administrative code really only, in a way, implicates the city of Santa Fe. So it's really an avoidance of conflict if it's unnecessary. There are some provisions that are cited in this administrative code of the statutory authority. And some of those provisions one might read to preempt the city code, even for a home rule municipality. And there's a whole kind of analytical process for determining whether it's a law of general applicability. And rather than go down that, I think if it's simple enough, I didn't see any downside to adopting the state administrative code language. I do apologize for not being able to present this in bill draft form so that it's easy for everyone to see. I could prepare an amendment for the next time this body meets if that makes it easier. But that's my thinking, and I'll stand for questions.
Yeah, Marcos, I just sent just a comparison document to your email. If that's something you could share, it might kind of give the make it a little clearer to the board, the difference between the two. Did you get that? You're on mute.
Yes, let me try to open that up and then share it.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's not in draft form either, but it just presents the two, the city ordinance and the code, and maybe a little bit easier way for us to wrap our heads around the issue. Sorry, I did see some hands raised and I didn't keep track of the order. But I see Ms. Kovnat, do you have a comment?
Well, I would, without looking at the two possibilities side by side, it strikes me that the state system is more compatible with ranked choice voting. That's the resolution of a tie on the among first, look at the second place choices seems to be consistent with our choice to have ranked choice voting. That's my immediate impression, at least.
Yeah, that's a good observation, that it is tied to the process rather than just random by lot. So thank you for that comment. Any other? I see Mr. Harrington. Let me see if any other members of the board have a comment. Okay, seeing Mr. Harrington, I saw you with your hand up. We'd be happy to hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I think a little review of history here would lead to a really simple solution to this problem. Santa Fe, as you know, adopted and implemented ranked choice before the enactment of the Local Election Act. And so it needed to find a whole set of rules about how you conduct a ranked choice election. And that's when 9-1.15 was adopted. Then came the Local Election Act, which gave the Secretary of State authority to adopt rules on this. And she adopted detailed rules on the conduct of ranked choice elections and how you count the votes. And it looked as if she almost copied Santa Fe in every single respect except one, and that's this business of tie votes. And there is, because there's an ambiguity in the statute about on the preemption issue, it is important to resolve this. But I think, it appears from a review that the only conflict is tie votes. But when lawyers for candidates get to looking at this stuff, I would think there might be a risk that other conflicts might appear. And so it would be my suggestion that Santa Fe should follow the example of Las Cruces, which adopted ranked choice voting after the adoption of the Local Election Act and the adoption of the Secretary's rules, and just said for all these issues of running a ranked choice election, we go by the Secretary's rules. We incorporate them by reference. And then you don't have any risks, because these risks can be serious. I mean, this is a post-election counting issue, and that kind of thing can delay the results of election. And you get a situation where you don't know who the mayor is or who a councilor is. So it would be important to resolve it. And I think the safest and simplest would be to repeal 9-115 and substitute something like Las Cruces. In an email, I think to Justin Marcos or somebody, I gave the site of that Las Cruces section. I don't have it in front of me right now, and can't refer you to it, but it's there.
So Jim, you're talking about a more extensive amendment than just to the tie vote procedures. You're talking about pulling the entire ranked choice voting section and replacing it with the Secretary of State's rules. And maybe they're very similar, but you're talking about something a little more extensive. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, that's correct, because I suppose there is a risk. I mean, I've just reviewed them myself and determined that the Secretary appeared to have followed Santa Fe in all these respects, but there are some slight differences in wording, but the only clear conflict was on the ties. So probably the only thing that's necessary is to resolve this tie thing. But if you wanted to be safe and resolve this and not even have a preemption issue ever arise, the example of Las Cruces, because I don't think the city has any strong interest in doing it its way rather than the secretary's way. And because of the risk that there might be a conflict and there might be an argument about preemption, the preemption problem is not only, as Member Amer referred to, there's home rule, which, my reading, you guys have read the cases too, but my reading of the case law is that the boundaries of home rule are very fuzzy. Nobody knows how far that goes. And secondly, the Local Election Act has an ambiguity on this preemption issue, particularly for ranked choice. It says in several places that when a local ordinance conflicts with the provisions of the Local Election Act, the Local Election Act prevails. But only once does it mention the Secretary's rules. It says, if a local ordinance conflicts with the Local Election Act or the Secretary's rules adopted thereunder, then the Local Election Act and the Secretary's rules prevail. And that's in the section on 2-round traditional runoffs. And so, a clever lawyer could make the argument that's a sign that the legislature intended for this not to apply to ranked choice. That's the argument. I think it's probably a losing argument, but it's a reasonable argument. And where there are reasonable arguments on both sides of the issue, you have the seeds of an election dispute that could be messy and foul up the city government for however long it took to resolve it.
Yeah,
So,
good.
that would be something to think about, that the board should think about. Should you do a clean sweep here and just get rid of all these ranked choice rules and adopt the secretary so as to eliminate any arguments on this. And that would be my suggestion, but I don't know. But the only thing you have to resolve, I think, is this tie vote thing, but it would probably be safer and better to do a clean sweep, I think.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that comment. Ms. Lujan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Harrington, for talking about this in the way you did. And I think you're absolutely right. I think there are two things here we have, to resolve this conflict. I think we need, and I think you mentioned this, the repeal of what's the local ordinance. If I'm not mistaken, it's an ordinance that we have in place for a tie vote in place, that we'd have to address that, as well as then replacing or either adopting, what the Local Election Act has in place for the Secretary of State's office, or just amending this section to, because like Member Kavanagh said, this is tied to a process. I think that this is something I would tend to agree with what Mr. Harrington is saying. I think since we have adopted the Local Election Act, we should just be in compliance with it fully. And I think that would take care of this. But it's, for us to discuss and figure this out. But yeah, I think we have to do two things here, with what is already in place as an ordinance, and then also how we want to amend this. And I think in amending it, we follow the Election Act, which we've already adopted. So that's just my 2 cents there.
Thank you. Let's see, do any other board members have comment or questions? My understanding of the discussion is that it sounds to me like we should ask the city, ask Marcos and the legislative team to come up with a draft change to the ordinances to align with the Secretary of State's regulations certainly on the tie resolution, and I'll leave it. I think the question of whether it's a wholesale deletion and replacement with the Secretary of State's rules, I'm not clear on that, but I think we can work with the city to find the best route to make sure that our ordinances align with the Secretary of State's rules. Hello, Mr. Biederman. Welcome to the discussion. We're talking about the tie vote resolution process. So thank you for joining us.
I've only got a limited amount of time. I have to catch a train, but I'm glad to take what time I have. I will try to join by phone while I'm en route if I can.
Good. Well, good to see you for whatever time you have. So,
Thank you.
with that, does everyone agree with that basic direction to the city, and they can come back to us with an actual draft of an ordinance? Okay, I'm seeing heads nodding, and if anyone thinks differently, let us know.
I'll abstain since I wasn't part of the conversation.
Sure. Well, we're not taking a formal vote here, but I am seeing basic agreement. So, Marcos and Christine, does that seem like clear enough direction to you? And we can work over the interim and hash out the details?
Yes,
Okay.
Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Yes, Ms. Lujan.
So would it be possible to get those working drafts of this to us so that we can just be actively a part of how this is moving forward? Mr. Chair.
Yes, I guess the only caveat I want to make is I want to avoid any kind of rolling quorum issues with that would violate the Open Meetings Act. And so what I may do is disseminate a draft to members individually and ask that you respond to me as a sort of a central point person and not to other members outside of a meeting, so that we don't have any kind of Open Meetings Act issue. But yes, it is possible.
Okay. So we'll expect to see some kind of a draft and to avoid, to avoid having a discussion in a not open meeting, we can address any concerns that people have at the next time we meet, and hopefully get to a resolution on this issue. So thanks everybody for that conversation. I think we're all set to go. All right. I think at this time we're moving on to item 8 on the agenda, which is matters from staff and overview on campaign signs regulation for candidates and other entities. Jason, Mr. Senna, I see your name on this item. So you're the person who's going to talk about this issue to the board?
Yes, we'll be the ones that are enforcing the political signs. So I'm here to answer any questions that you all may have about how we enforce and what's allowed. So pretty much we're kind of going through it, and we don't have a set date on when they can, in the code, which is under the campaign code of 9-2, and it's actually 9-2.15 temporary political signs. We do not have a set date as to where the candidates can set their signs up. So we do not have like a start date, or we have a finish date, but we do not have a start date. So besides that, I mean, it's pretty straightforward in the code on how to enforce. So, I don't know if you all have any questions, I can answer them for you or what, but it is pretty, we haven't had too many problems. Usually the candidates are pretty good about picking up their signs if they're in a bad spot in the city and not on private property and such.
Okay. So there's no changes or anything being considered. It's just you're here to answer questions if there are any.
I'm here to answer questions if there are any.
Okay. Yeah, this item was added to the agenda through the city, so that's great. I don't have any particular issues or questions with the signs. Do any board members have questions or issues? Okay.
Chair Miller, if I could, I do just want to note that as Mr. Senna mentioned, this is addressed in our code. He did cite the section. It was also included in the candidate packets. that were picked up by each candidate, but if there are any questions, we would both be available for these items. But yes, Jason will be leading the enforcement piece as the code enforcement supervisor for the city. And I think we kind of did a run through during packet pickup of just a few keynotes to make sure that, you know, political signs needed to be on private property and needed to have a liaison contact on the back of each sign and so forth. So I did just want to note that this information was available to candidates, although we do have several of our candidates joining us for this meeting. So as Jason mentioned, if there are any questions for him, I do just want to note that as well, Chair Miller.
Good. Yeah, I know this is, there are always sign-related issues in the campaign, so I appreciate it. I'm not seeing any questions from the board. If there's anyone in the audience, in particular candidates who do have a question to direct to the city, we'd be happy to hear that question now. Would anyone like to say anything or ask any questions? Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. Mr. Senna, anything else to add before we move on to the next item?
No, I appreciate you all having me here, and thank you guys very much.
Okay. We appreciate it too. Thank you for being here. Let's go to item 8B, which is an election 2021 status update from the city clerk, Ms. Mihalcik.
Chair Miller, members of the board, I just have a few quick updates. I did want to notify the board that we have several candidates running for election, which is very exciting. In District 1, we have 4 candidates. In District 2 and District 3, we have single candidates. In District 4, we currently have 2 candidates, and we do have 1 individual who is deciding whether he would like to run for office as well. And then for mayor, we do have 3 candidates. So I did just want to note that we do have information available on the city clerk's page regarding this election. We also I'm going to send out a reminder just through our email distribution channels from the city of Santa Fe side, as well as our social media, notifying candidates that there is still time for them to come forward and participate in the election if they do wish to do that or have any questions. And then I did just want to note that for this year, of course, the Secretary of State's office provided nominating petition forms in Spanish, but we also did have our seed money forms and our $5 contribution forms for public campaign financing translated into Spanish, which I was very excited about, and we've distributed those to our candidates as well for their use. Those are also available on our website for download. And then I just wanted to note, I think there was an article in the paper, but we do have 2 positions at this time, which is again our District 1 election for a council candidate, and then our mayor election will both trigger our ranked choice voting in this election. So our office will be working collaboratively with the Santa Fe County clerk for voter education on this piece. We have a preliminary marketing plan on our end for education, which will start out with social media in July and August. And then towards the end of August, we will also be including radio and print email distributions, as well as a direct mailer to registered voter households in the within the city limits. So those are my quick updates. If anyone has any questions, I'm always happy to stand for some. I know. Ms. Lujan.
Great. Thank you.
Sorry, sorry, didn't mean to hop over you.
Thank you. Ms. Lujan, I saw you with your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Clerk, for that update. In regards to some of that information that you just gave us, I do have some questions. from the, I guess I'll just start with the petition signature information. You know, we know that there were initially petition signature forms given out that weren't approved by the Secretary of State's office and reported back were candidates that had already started using them. So my question is to you, and you said from an article that was put out as well that you were going to extend the deadline to return those petition signatures. So what is the new deadline for receiving those, receiving petition signatures?
Great question, Member Lujan. That was actually some clarifications based on a historic practice and form. So you are correct, a form that had historically been used by the city clerk's office, excuse me, was distributed. We did work with the county and the Secretary of State's office to provide the approved form from the Secretary of State's office. Now, again, historically, there had been a deadline for all nominating petition forms, and again, working to get our election in alignment with the Local Election Act. Wouldn't necessarily say, I guess, the city had created a deadline. However, through this entire process, that was aligned with the August 24th deadline, which is consistent with all elections. So nominating petition signatures for for candidates utilizing private financing will be in alignment with the August 24th date. And then for candidates seeking public campaign financing, it'll be July 19th. And those were established. Oh, sorry, I apologize.
No, go ahead, finish.
No, with the county clerk, I think, you know, as you mentioned, and a little bit of what Marcos has mentioned, is really this election cycle, we've come across a lot of things in our ordinance that I would like to update, and really some collaboration with the county clerk and the Secretary of State's office, I think, to make it just a lot of things more consistent. So that was one of them. And when the deadline, as I mentioned, was really put in place to align with the August 24th deadline.
Great. And thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Clerk, for that answer. And I just have a few more questions as well. So out of those 11 candidates, do you know how many at this time? You may not, because, you know, I don't know that any of those candidates are turning in their petition signatures at this time. But I know that there was some reporting on it. And do you know of how many of those initial forms that you sent out have been completed or turned in, or do you have any of that type of information?
No, we provided the updated form fairly quickly. I did speak with some candidates individually, but they all kind of understood the situation and started utilizing the new forms. So there were, I believe, 3 candidates that had picked up the forms of all, you know, of the total number of candidates. And as I mentioned, we did speak with them and then provide the new forms both immediately via email once they were received from the Secretary of State's office. And then we did offer to also print hard copies of the forms and either meet the candidates that already had them or they could pick them up. So we did have one candidate who we did run copies for, and that individual came back, and then the other candidates that had already picked up their forms just replaced it with the new one.
Okay. And thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Clerk. So I think where I'm going to go with my next question is, so what are you planning to do with those initial forms if they are turned in? Are you going to accept them and pass them on to, you know, in alliance with the Local Election Act, that they would then go on to the county clerk, for her to collect? Is that
Correct.
what you're going to do? Is that what's going to happen?
We did, after speaking with the Secretary of State's office, they did ask that we notify the candidates that the preference would be to use the form approved by the Secretary of State's office. But again, because the county clerk will be the one utilizing the forms, all forms will be turned into her at the end of the cycle. So, and she was also, again, done a lot of communication with both the Secretary of State's office and the county clerk. And she also was in agreement that the form approved by the Secretary of State's office needed to be utilized. So I think the candidates were, as I mentioned, I spoke with them and they all said, oh shoot, we had already sent it out, but we will get signatures again on the correct form. So, and they all felt like they had a substantial amount of time to collect signatures or redistribute via email.
Great, and thank you again. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Clerk. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because we know, like through elections, and if voters go to cast their votes, and for whatever reason they, their name's not on the registry, we still allow them to vote, and we provide a provisional ballot at that time. So I feel like, if the information is all there, it's clear, and this is a mishap, and this is our transition, into the Local Election Act, and we want to provide a means to memorialize and stamp that this is part of the process, and that no one is feeling left out, or the determination isn't made that those signatures are in some way. So I really appreciate that and all your work and effort in figuring this out. And anytime we move into our election laws and there's change and transition, there's going to be some things that we have to take care of. And I feel like, you're handling that very well. And I really appreciate all your answers that you gave us today. Moving forward, I think that's what we're doing here today, is we're figuring this out. And so thank you for all your work. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing me to ask these questions. And thank you, Madam Clerk, for all your work that you're doing. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Member Lujan. And Chair Miller, if I will, I do just want to reiterate that, this is very much not only a transition year as a new city clerk, we have a new county clerk. And although we have been through one local election act, I think that there was a very short turnaround time to do that at the last election. And so we are working through things, even procedurally, that might be more beneficial. And I've been really, again, working closely with Secretary of State and the county clerk's office, but I think even the Secretary of State's office has mentioned that, there is a great deal of collaboration and coordination, getting entities on board with the Local Election Act, and that we're working through. And so even though, of course, I would have preferred the correct form be distributed the first time, I was actually very happy that it was something that came to light, something that we can address, and moving forward, something that we can, correct. And that's absolutely my intent, is to make sure that we are in alignment, we're using what we need to be using, and that we continue to move in that direction. So I do want to note that I think there's probably going to be more things, unfortunately, that arise, but I do want this board to know that I'm always committed to correcting them. And I'm working to flag them. I think we're working closely with a lot of entities and individuals that can really help facilitate that. But that is absolutely the interest, and we say kind of as soon as possible when something pops up. But I know our office is very committed to that as well. And I just thank you, Chair Miller, and members, for that. Good.
Well, it's a big challenge, there's no doubt. So we appreciate all your efforts. Ms. Lujan, do you have more questions, or was that, are you done? Okay.
Mr. Chair, thank you so much. That's all I have. And this, like you said, this is what's going to happen. This is part of the transition, and your due diligence and everything that you're doing is well noted and really appreciated. So thank you very much.
Great. Are there any further questions on the election 2021 status? All right, I'm not seeing any further questions or discussion. So item 9 is matters from the committee. Are there any, do any board members have matters to raise? Yes, Mr. Biederman.
Well, getting in so late and leaving early, I don't have much credibility here, but I will say that the one thing I'd like to see is if we could possibly start meeting in person again. I am so sick of Zoom. So just a suggestion.
Yeah,
Here,
here. I think we all second that. It sounds like we probably are, like the city's close, right, to meeting in person again?
Chair Miller, if you would like, I can kind of address that. It
Please.
coincidentally is in my realm as a city clerk, but it is true. We are working to get many of our committees back in person. I'm hopeful that we'll have that opportunity by the middle of July. If not, we absolutely will be able to transition to that in August. So I know the Attorney General's office was still encouraging participation via Zoom, and we have been testing hybrid. We had our first hybrid governing body meeting on the 9th. We'll have the second one on the 30th, and then we'll move forward from there. But I do definitely by August, I think we'll be back in person, and possibly by the middle of July for most other committees. So I hear that sentiment from many. They're ready to be off of Zoom and be back in person. So.
And I have to leave now, but I will say, Mr. Chairman, if I may, that I hope we'll schedule a meeting just to see what it's like to have a meeting in person. I'm really looking forward to it.
We'll have one just for fun.
Just for fun. Okay. I do have to leave. My apologies to the board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Lujan, were you? Oh.
Mr. Chair, I'm just waving bye to Mr. Biederman.
Okay, got it. I was waving by, not asking for anything. Okay. Let's see. That's part of the problem with Zoom is we have to interpret the hand signals. And okay, I don't think there are any other comments unless or any matters from the board. All right, seeing none. Matters from the chair. I don't have anything. The next meeting, we don't have a meeting scheduled, and I don't think we have any urgent issues, but it is mid-June. I would expect we'll try to schedule a meeting in the next quarter to address the at least when we hear from the city that they're have some progress on the draft legislation relating to the tie vote procedures, we can get something set up. And if anything else comes up, we'll be ready to meet. If anything urgent comes up, we'll call a meeting right away. Otherwise, I would expect something in the next quarter.
Mr.
Yes,
Chair, I do have a question. Are we going to be scheduling those meetings down the way or the next few months with the candidates like we've done in the past to have them introduce themselves and so on, or
well, that was
something that
that was done last meeting. Theoretically, I think through the Zoom and COVID and the way things work, it was a little bit different than before, but we did have that session. If we need to do something in more depth or like that again, we could, but.
And just one other thing, I guess I can call the clerk, and it just dawned on me when she gave, Madam Clerk, Mr. Chair, when you told us about the timeline that you're going to be getting those educational pieces out in the mail and so forth, and you said, I think your last piece is you kind of focused in August. I would just, if it's worth anything, I'm not trying to make a recommendation, but I have worked in elections and getting information out and understanding how voters take in information and how they act. So if you would maybe consider waiting closer to the election date to get your final piece out to voters, and do it, you know, if you're looking at your timeline, because that's really when they're most likely or most paying attention to what's going on. But that's just, again, my 2 cents on that. So take it for what it is. I just, something that my brain works that way because of my experience working in elections. So thank you.
Absolutely. Member Lujan, if I can, I apologize. We will kick off more of the campaign in August. So the social media will start in July, and then the other materials will start in August and run through the election. But I absolutely am happy to present that plan even to this group or make recommendations. But I agree. We'll start and then we will continue through the months closer to. So Ms. Chair Miller, I also do want to note we do have candidates for this meeting. I did provide the link to them in an earlier communication. So I know that sometimes comes up, but I did just want to note that we do have several candidates that are participating in this meeting.
Great. You know, and that makes me realize something that we did not have on the agenda that we always do. And this is just a pure oversight on my part, is we don't have an item for public comment. And so if there is any public comment, we would certainly like to hear it. And that includes from the candidates. If there is anybody on the line who'd like to say anything to the board or have any thoughts or comments about what we do or what we've done today or looking forward, we would be happy to hear from you.
Hello, Justin. I just want to.
Mr. Carson, yes, please.
Hi. I just, want to thank you guys for doing this. So you guys are doing a great job and going through a lot of painful detail, but I think the meeting was really good. I had trouble logging on earlier and then I was on my phone and I got on the meeting, but that's all I had to say is you guys are doing a great job.
Thank you. We appreciate it. All right. Anyone else? I'll just give people a minute. Looks like we're not hearing from anyone else. So thank you all. Like I said, we'll schedule another meeting sometime relatively soon in the next quarter. And I think it's time to adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
I second.
Moved by Ms. Amer, seconded by Ms. Martinez. I think we need a roll call. It seems overly technical, but let's go ahead with that.
Member Amer,
Yes.
Member Kovnat,
Yes.
Member Lujan,
Yes.
Member Martinez.
Yes.
The motion has been approved.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone, and we'll talk soon, hopefully in person.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.